Margaret Harris stepped into the elevator on the 42nd floor of Riverside Medical Center. One hand pressed against her swollen belly, never knowing that the next 20 minutes would change 2 lives forever. The doors slid open on the 41st floor, and Harold Jenkins entered with his cleaning cart, the night janitor whose face she'd passed 1,000 times without truly seeing. The elevator descended, then it lurched. Grinding metal. Flickering lights. Silence. They stopped between floors. Margaret gasped as warm liquid flooded down her legs. Her water had broken. Harold's eyes met hers in the emergency lighting, and in that moment, he understood. This baby was coming now. This wealthy stranger, whose name graced the hospital's largest wing, would give birth in his hands, and nothing would ever be the same. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Harold Jenkins arrived at Riverside Medical Center at exactly 9:45 in the evening, the same time he'd arrived every weeknight for the past 27 years. At 63, his body carried the weight of decades spent on his feet. But his back remained straight, his stride purposeful. He pushed through the employee entrance, nodding to Marcus at the security desk, one of the few people who still greeted him by name. The bus ride from his small studio apartment across town had taken 2 hours tonight, longer than usual because of construction on Maple Street. But Harold never complained. He simply left earlier, brought a book, watched the city roll past his window. His uniform, navy blue with his name stitched in fading red thread above the pocket, had been washed so many times the fabric felt soft as flannel. The knees were worn thin, the cuffs frayed, but it was clean and pressed. Harold took pride in that. In the basement locker room, he prepared his cart with the same meticulous care he brought to everything. Spray bottles arranged by purpose, cleaning cloths folded and stacked, mop secured, bucket checked. His thermos of coffee, brewed at home in the battered machine that had belonged to his late wife Sarah, fit perfectly in the cup holder he'd installed himself. $5 saved was $5 he could send to Emma. His daughter lived in Portland now, struggling to make ends meet as a medical assistant, raising 2 kids on her own after her husband left. Harold sent her $300 every month, money he carved from his own budget by bringing lunch, skipping luxuries, walking when he could, instead of taking the bus on weekends. She never asked for it, always protested. But he sent it anyway. That's what fathers did. Harold rolled his cart to the service elevator, pressed the button for the 40th floor, and began his night. He knew every hallway, every corner, every stubborn stain on every floor of this 45-story building. He knew which rooms needed extra attention, which nurses worked which shifts, where the light bulbs flickered and needed replacing. For 27 years, he had kept this hospital clean, kept it running in the ways most people never noticed. Doctors saved lives in the light. Harold preserved dignity in the quiet hours, making sure patients woke to clean floors, sterile surfaces, the subtle comfort of order. Most people looked through him, past him, around him. He'd made peace with that long ago. Invisible or not, the work mattered. That was enough. Margaret Harris emerged from the back seat of the black Mercedes, her chauffeur Michael holding the door as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. She breathed through it. One hand braced against the car's roof, the other cradling her swollen belly. Mild contractions, her obstetrician had said that morning. Braxton Hicks, probably. Come in tonight if they get stronger or more regular. They'd gotten both. Michael asked if she needed a wheelchair. Margaret shook her head, straightened her designer maternity dress, the pale blue silk that had cost more than most people earned in a week. Her diamond earrings caught the parking garage's fluorescent lights. Her wedding ring, 3 carats, felt heavy on her swollen finger. She looked every inch the wealthy benefactor whose name appeared on the hospital's east wing in letters 2 feet tall. But beneath the expensive clothes and jewelry, she was simply terrified. Margaret walked toward the elevator bank, her phone clutched in her hand. Richard's number showing 12 unanswered calls. He was in Singapore, or was it Tokyo, closing some deal that couldn't wait. She'd stopped tracking his trips months ago, stopped expecting him to answer when she called. Their marriage had become a polite arrangement, two people orbiting separate lives, connected only by this baby. This miracle. This last chance. She was 42 years old. She'd endured 6 years of fertility treatments, countless injections, procedures that left her body bruised and her heart battered. The miscarriage 3 years ago had nearly destroyed her. She'd held that tiny lost life in her hands and felt her world collapse. Richard had patted her shoulder awkwardly, then flown to Frankfurt the next day. She'd grieved alone. When she became pregnant again, she'd been afraid to hope, afraid to love this growing life too much in case it was taken away too. But hope, she'd started calling the baby in her mind, had held on, kicked, grown, survived. Now, at 9 months, she was coming. And Margaret was alone. She entered the hospital through the main doors, nodding to the night receptionist who recognized her immediately. Everyone recognized Margaret Harris. Her donations had funded new equipment, research grants, an entire pediatric wing. Plaques with her name hung throughout the building. Yet walking these halls tonight, contractions coming every 8 minutes, her husband unreachable halfway across the world, Margaret had never felt more invisible. Money couldn't hold your hand. Status couldn't whisper that everything would be okay. She pressed the elevator call button, checked her phone again. Nothing. The doors opened. She stepped inside, pressed 42, heading to the obstetrics offices on the top floor. Another contraction came as the elevator began to rise. Margaret closed her eyes, breathed, and felt utterly, desperately alone. Margaret stepped out of Dr. Chen's office on the 42nd floor. Her appointment completed, instructions received. False labor, the doctor had said with a reassuring smile. But call immediately if the contractions intensify or her water breaks. They'd intensify, Margaret thought. One hand pressed against the wall as another wave tightened across her belly. She made her way to the elevator bank, pressed the down button, waited as the car ascended from somewhere far below. The doors opened. She stepped inside, pressed 15 for the obstetrics wing where her regular monitoring appointments were scheduled, though she wasn't sure why she'd pressed it. Habit, perhaps, or the comfort of familiar hallways. The doors began to close. A hand shot through, triggering the sensor. They opened again. Harold Jenkins pushed his cleaning cart inside, nodded politely at the well-dressed pregnant woman already occupying the space. She nodded back, barely seeing him, her attention focused inward on the tightening sensation that had become her constant companion. Harold had seen her before, of course, passing through hallways, emerging from administrative offices, always surrounded by hospital executives. He didn't know her name, didn't know she was anyone important. Just another patient in a building full of them. He noticed she looked uncomfortable, her breathing deliberate and controlled, but he didn't intrude. People didn't want janitors asking questions, offering help. He'd learned that long ago. The elevator began its descent. 41, 40, 39. Margaret breathed through another contraction, stronger this time, her knuckles white against the handrail. 38. Then everything changed. A grinding sound, metal against metal, something fundamental failing. The lights flickered once, twice. The elevator lurched violently. Margaret cried out, stumbling. Harold grabbed his cart to keep it from rolling. The car shuddered and stopped, absolutely still, suspended somewhere between floors. The main lights died. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, dim and yellowish, casting everything in sickly amber. Margaret's breath came in short gasps, panic and contraction, merging into one overwhelming sensation. Harold moved immediately to the control panel, pressed the emergency call button. Nothing. He pressed it again, held it down. Static crackled from the speaker. Then silence. He tried the door open button, the floor buttons, everything. Nothing responded. The intercom was completely dead. He turned to Margaret, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, seeing not just a janitor but another human being trapped in this small metal box. Another contraction hit, stronger than all the others, and then she felt it. The unmistakable sensation of warmth flooding down her legs, soaking through her expensive silk dress. Her water had broken. "Oh, God," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, God. No. Not here. Not now." Margaret fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, nearly dropping it as another contraction built. She pulled it from her purse, stared at the screen. No signal. Not even one bar. The elevator shaft was a dead zone, metal walls blocking everything. "Do you have a phone?" she asked Harold, her voice tight with panic. Harold pulled his ancient flip phone from his pocket, the one Emma had begged him to replace, and flipped it open. No service. He showed her the screen, shook his head. "Nothing. We're too deep in the shaft." Margaret doubled over as the contraction peaked, a cry torn from her throat. This wasn't false labor. This was real. This was happening. Harold moved toward her carefully, his hands raised slightly, non-threatening. "Ma'am, are you in labor?" She nodded, couldn't speak, rode the wave of pain until it subsided enough to breathe. "My water," she gasped. It just broke. Harold's mind went into a mode he hadn't accessed in years, the clear-headed crisis management his wife Sarah had taught him. Stay calm. Assess. Act. "All right," he said, his voice steady and warm. "We're going to be okay. My name is Harold Jenkins. What's your name?" "Margaret," she whispered. "Margaret Harris." Harold nodded, filing the name away, not recognizing it, not caring about anything except the terrified woman in front of him. "Margaret, I need you to tell me how far apart the contractions are. When did the last one end?" She checked her watch with trembling hands, tried to think through the panic. 3 minutes ago, maybe less. They're coming fast. Too fast." Harold calculated quickly. Water broken, contractions 3 minutes apart or less. This baby wasn't going to wait for rescue. This baby was coming now, in this broken elevator, whether they were ready or not. He turned back to the control panel, pressed the emergency button repeatedly, held it down for 30 seconds. Nothing but dead static. He pounded on the metal doors with both fists, the sound echoing in the small space. "Help!" he shouted. "Someone help! We're trapped! Pregnant woman in labor!" He pressed his ear against the door, listening. Silence. The elevator shaft swallowed his voice. They could be anywhere between the 38th and 37th floors, suspended in the heart of the building where sound didn't carry, where nobody walked this time of night. Harold turned back to Margaret, saw the fear in her eyes, the way she clutched her belly. They were alone, completely alone, and this baby would not wait. Harold looked at Margaret, saw the terror in her eyes, and made a decision. He couldn't let fear control this moment. Someone had to be strong, and tonight, that was him. "Margaret," he said, moving closer, his voice calm and authoritative in a way he rarely used. "I need you to listen to me. I've delivered a baby before." Her eyes widened. "What?" "My grandson. 8 years ago. My daughter Emma went into labor during a camping trip, miles from anywhere. No cell service, no hospital, just us in a tent in the middle of nowhere." He kept his voice steady. Didn't mention how his hands had shaken so badly he could barely tie the cord. Didn't mention the prayers he'd whispered with every breath. Didn't mention how he'd been certain something would go wrong. The baby came healthy, strong. Emma and the baby were both fine. Margaret stared at this elderly janitor in his worn uniform, this man whose name she'd never known despite passing him countless times in these hallways. She searched his face, saw something there that cut through her panic. Competence. Quiet. Strength. Kindness. She had no other choice. No rescue was coming. Her husband was 10,000 miles away. Her doctor was somewhere in this massive building. Unreachable. There was only Harold. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Help me." Harold nodded once, then turned to his cleaning cart with purpose. He pulled out packages of cleaning cloths, still wrapped in sterile plastic, the kind the hospital required for medical-grade sanitation. He had rubber gloves, the disposable kind. A box of them on the bottom shelf. Bottled water. 3 bottles he kept for his breaks. He arranged everything on the elevator floor with methodical precision, his hands steady now that he had a task, a mission. He told Margaret, his voice gentle but certain. "The baby is going to be fine. I'm going to help you through this." He pulled off his jacket, the worn denim he'd had for 15 years, folded it carefully. "We're going to need you lying down soon, but not yet. Can you stand for now?" Margaret nodded, gripping the handrail as another contraction built. Harold talked her through it, his voice a constant anchor. "Breathe. That's it. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're doing great. You're so strong." When the contraction passed, he helped her lean against the elevator wall, positioned his cart to give them more space. He unwrapped the sterile cloths, laid them out, pulled on the rubber gloves. Everything he did radiated calm competence, and Margaret found herself believing him. Maybe, somehow, they would survive this. Harold knelt beside Margaret, helped her ease down onto the elevator floor he'd cleaned and covered with sterile cloths. He folded his denim jacket, placed it gently under her head. The metal floor was cold, unforgiving, but it was all they had. Margaret tried to settle, tried to breathe, and then another contraction slammed into her like a freight train. She screamed. The sound raw and primal, echoing off the metal walls. Harold checked his watch, counted in his head. 2 minutes since the last one. The baby was coming fast, faster than he'd expected. "Margaret, look at me," he said firmly. She turned her eyes to his, wild with pain and fear. "Breathe with me, in through your nose. Slow, deep. Hold it. Now, out through your mouth, slow. That's it. Again." It was exactly what Sarah had taught him 40 years ago in those childbirth classes. Her hand in his, practicing for Emma's birth. Margaret followed his rhythm, and the contraction began to ease. She gripped his hand suddenly, squeezed so hard he felt his bones grind together. He winced but didn't pull away, let her take what she needed. "Is this your first baby?" he asked gently when she could breathe again. "Yes," Margaret gasped. "After so many years trying. After losing one. This baby is everything." "Where's your husband?" Harold asked. Though he suspected he knew the answer from the loneliness etched in her face. "Away," Margaret said, and her voice broke. "Business trip. Tokyo or Singapore. I don't even remember anymore. He's always away." The loneliness in those words pierced Harold's heart. This woman, for all her obvious wealth, was utterly alone in the most important moment of her life. "My daughter Emma had her first baby 8 years ago," Harold said, his gravelly voice filling the silence, giving Margaret something to focus on besides the pain. "Beautiful boy named Lucas. My wife Sarah and I were with her. Sarah was a nurse, taught me everything I know. She passed 5 years ago. Cancer, but I still hear her voice sometimes, guiding me." Margaret listened, found comfort in his words, in the warmth of his presence. Another contraction built, and Harold talked her through it, never letting go of her hand. When it passed, Margaret looked at him with something like wonder. "Why are you so calm?" Harold smiled, a sad, honest smile. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Absolutely terrified. But someone needs to be strong right now. And tonight, that's me. That's all. Just me doing what needs to be done." Margaret felt tears slip down her temples. For the first time in this endless night, she didn't feel alone. Another contraction came, and Harold checked his watch again. 90 seconds. They'd gone from 3 minutes to 2 to 90 seconds in less than half an hour. They were out of time. The baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. "Margaret," Harold said, positioning himself at her feet, his voice gentle but firm. "I need to check the baby's position. I need to see how far along you are. Is that all right?" Margaret nodded. Beyond modesty now, beyond everything except the primal need to survive this, to bring her baby into the world alive. Harold worked as carefully as he could, preserving what dignity was possible in this impossible situation. What he saw made his heart pound. The baby was crowning. He could see the top of the head, dark hair matted and visible. This wasn't coming soon. This was happening now. "All right," he said, keeping his voice absolutely steady even as his pulse raced. "Margaret, the baby's coming. When the next contraction hits, you're going to need to push. Do you understand?" "No," Margaret cried, tears streaming down her face. "No, I can't. Not here. Not like this. I need a hospital. I need doctors. I need—" "You need to push," Harold said firmly. "And you can do this." Margaret sobbed. "Harold, I can't. I'm not strong enough. I'm not—" Harold moved quickly, gently took her face in his calloused hands, hands that had scrubbed floors for 27 years, hands that had held his dying wife, hands that had caught his grandson as he entered the world. He looked directly into Margaret's terrified eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute conviction. "You are the bravest person I've ever met," he said. "You've been through years of treatments. You've survived loss. You've carried this baby for 9 months, and you've made it this far. You can do this, Margaret. I know you can. And I promise you, I swear to you, I will not let anything happen to you or your baby. Do you hear me? I've got you, both of you." The conviction in his voice, the certainty in his weathered face, the strength in his hands, it cut through Margaret's panic like light through darkness. She saw in his eyes that he meant every word, that this janitor she'd never truly seen before would die before he let anything happen to her daughter. Margaret took a shaking breath, then another. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I can do this. You can do this," Harold repeated, moving back into position. "Now breathe, gather your strength. The next contraction is coming, and we're going to bring your baby into this world." The contraction came like a wave crashing over a shore, inevitable and overwhelming. Margaret felt it build from somewhere deep inside her, a force beyond her control. "Now," Harold said. "Push now, Margaret, push!" Margaret bore down with everything she had, every ounce of strength left in her exhausted body, and screamed. The sound filled the elevator, raw and ancient and powerful. Harold kept his voice steady, firm, encouraging. "That's it! You're doing it! Keep going, keep pushing!" The contraction eased. Margaret collapsed back, gasping, sobbing. "I can't," she panted. "I can't do it again." "Yes, you can," Harold said. "Look at me. You just did it. You're almost there. One more. Maybe 2. You've got this." Another contraction built immediately, faster than the last. Margaret pushed again, screaming, pouring everything into it. Harold's hands were shaking now. He could feel the tremor in his fingers, but he kept them as steady as he could, supporting the emerging baby's head with infinite care. He told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Margaret, I can see your baby. One more push. You're almost there. You're doing it." Margaret summoned strength she didn't know she possessed, strength that came from some primal place beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. She pushed with a cry that seemed torn from her very soul. And suddenly, in a rush of warmth and motion, the baby slid into Harold's waiting hands. A tiny, perfect girl. Silent. Harold's heart stopped. The baby wasn't crying. She was still, small, slippery in his trembling hands. For one terrible, eternal heartbeat, the elevator was absolutely silent. Then the baby gasped and cried. A strong, healthy wail that echoed off the metal walls, the most beautiful sound Harold had ever heard. His eyes flooded with tears. "She's here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Margaret, she's here. She's perfect. She's breathing!" Harold moved quickly, his training from that camping trip 8 years ago coming back. He gently cleared the baby's nose and mouth with the corner of a clean cloth, making sure her airway was open. The baby cried louder, her tiny fists waving. Harold pulled off his flannel shirt, the soft, worn fabric he'd worn under his uniform, the only clean, soft thing he had. He wrapped the tiny girl carefully, supporting her head, keeping her warm. Then he placed her gently on Margaret's chest. Margaret sobbed, her hands coming up to hold her daughter, to feel the warm weight of her, the realness of her. "Hi," she whispered through her tears. "Hi, baby. Hi, Hope. Mama's here. Mama's got you." Harold watched as Margaret held her daughter against her chest, skin to skin, the baby's crying settling into small mewing sounds. Margaret sobbed, great shaking sobs of relief and joy and disbelief, her hands cradling the tiny head, feeling the warmth of her, the weight of her, the absolute miracle of her. The baby was pink and healthy, her cries strong and lusty. She was perfect. But Harold's work wasn't finished. He monitored Margaret carefully, watched for the signs Sarah had taught him to recognize. The placenta delivered, and Harold handled it with surprising competence, wrapping it in cleaning cloths, making sure Margaret wasn't bleeding excessively. Everything looked good. Better than good. Miraculous. "We need to tie off the cord," Harold said gently. "I don't have clamps, but I have something that'll work." He bent down, unlaced his work boots, pulled the laces free. Margaret watched, stunned, as this elderly janitor used his own shoelaces to tie off the umbilical cord in 2 places, his movements careful and precise. It was a trick he'd learned decades ago, something Sarah had mentioned once, something he'd used when Lucas was born in that tent. "How do you know how to do all this?" Margaret asked, her voice filled with wonder. She watched him work with such tenderness, such skill, caring for her and Hope with the attention of a trained professional. Harold tied the final knot, checked his work, then sat back on his heels. His shirt was gone, wrapped around the baby. His feet were unlaced in his boots. He was covered in blood and fluid, exhausted, but his eyes were clear. "My wife Sarah was a nurse," he said softly. "Worked in labor and delivery for 30 years. She used to come home and tell me about her day, about the babies, about the mothers. Over 40 years of marriage, she taught me things without even meaning to. I'd ask questions, she'd answer. I'd remember." His voice caught. "She passed 5 years ago. Cancer. But tonight, helping you, helping Hope." He smiled at the name Margaret had whispered to her daughter. "It feels like Sarah's here, guiding my hands, like she's helping me help you." Margaret felt tears slip down her face again. But these were different tears. She was beginning to understand that this man, this janitor she'd never truly seen, carried depths of love and loss and knowledge she never would have guessed. He'd given everything tonight. His jacket, his shirt, his shoelaces, his knowledge, his strength, and he'd asked for nothing in return. They'd been trapped for 45 minutes now, suspended between floors in a broken elevator that had become a makeshift delivery room. Harold kept checking Hope, gently touching her tiny hand, watching the rise and fall of her chest wrapped in his flannel shirt. Her breathing was steady, her color good and pink, her occasional cries strong and healthy. He monitored Margaret too, checking for excessive bleeding, arranging clean cloths around her, doing what he could to preserve her warmth and dignity. Margaret held her daughter against her chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own, still unable to fully believe this was real. Harold sat beside them, cross-legged on the floor, a guardian in the dim emergency lighting. The crisis had passed, but he remained watchful, present. "Tell me about your life," Margaret said quietly. "I want to know about you." Harold smiled, a little embarrassed. "Not much to tell. I've worked here 27 years, since I was 36. Came for the insurance." "The insurance?" Harold nodded. "I was a carpenter before. Built houses, custom cabinets, good work. But Sarah got sick, breast cancer, and we needed better coverage than I could get on my own. The hospital was hiring, offered full benefits, so I took the job." He paused, remembering. "I thought it would be temporary, just until she got better. But the hospital saved her life. Surgery, treatment, care. They gave us 10 more years together. 10 years I never would have had." His voice grew thick. "So I stayed. Even after she was gone, I stayed. I cleaned the same halls where she was treated, Walk past the oncology wing where she spent so many days. It feels like she's still here somehow, like I'm close to her memory. Margaret listened, her throat tight. She was beginning to understand the shape of this man's life. The quiet sacrifices, the enormous love. You gave up your career for her, she said softly. Never regretted it, Harold said simply. Not once. You don't count the cost when it's someone you love. You just do what needs doing. He looked at Hope, sleeping now against Margaret's chest. That's what love is. Showing up, staying, doing the hard thing because it's the right thing. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. This man, this janitor who rode the bus 2 hours each way, who sent money to his struggling daughter, who'd given up his career and his dreams, he lived with more grace and dignity than anyone she'd ever known. He had so little. Yet, he'd given everything tonight. His clothes, his knowledge, his strength, his calm presence. And he expected nothing in return. That was who Harold Jenkins was. That was what real wealth looked like. Margaret looked down at her daughter, the tiny face peaceful in sleep, and felt words rising that she'd never spoken aloud to anyone. I tried for 6 years to have a baby, she said quietly. Fertility treatments, injections, procedures, month after month of hope and disappointment. My husband, Richard, he went through the motions, showed up for appointments, but his heart was never in it. His business always came first. Harold listened, his weathered face open and without judgment. 3 years ago, I got pregnant, made it to 12 weeks. I thought we were safe. Her voice broke. I miscarried. Held that tiny life in my hands and felt my world end. Richard patted my shoulder, said we'd try again, then flew to Frankfurt the next morning. I grieved alone. She stroked Hope's soft head, tears falling. When I got pregnant again, I was terrified to believe it would work. Terrified to love her too much. But she held on. She grew. She kicked. And I started calling her Hope in my mind. Because that's what she was. Everything I'd yearned for. Everything I'd almost given up on. Hope, Harold said softly. That's a perfect name. Margaret smiled through her tears. I almost gave up trying. After the miscarriage, I told Richard I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep breaking my heart month after month. But something made me try one more time. And here she is. She looked at Harold. Here we are. In a broken elevator. And somehow it's perfect. Harold nodded slowly. Sometimes the greatest blessings come in the strangest ways, he said. In broken elevators. In moments when we're stripped of everything familiar, everything we thought we needed, that's when we find out what really matters. Who we really are. Margaret felt something shift inside her. Something fundamental. This night, this crisis, had given her something she'd never had in 42 years of life. Not in her marriage, not in her social circles, not in the countless charity galas and board meetings. This janitor, this stranger whose name she'd never known until an hour ago, saw her. Not Margaret Harris, philanthropist. Not the woman whose name was on the hospital wing. Not the wealthy donor who wrote checks. He saw her as simply a frightened woman who needed help. A mother bringing her daughter into the world. A human being, stripped bare, utterly real. And he'd met her there, in that rawness, with kindness and competence and grace. Thank you, Margaret whispered, for seeing me, for helping us, for being exactly who you are. Harold reached over, gently squeezed her hand. Thank you for trusting me, he said, for letting me be part of this miracle. Suddenly, voices echoed from somewhere outside the elevator shaft. Distant at first, then closer. Rescue workers. Someone had finally realized the elevator was stuck. Harold scrambled to his feet, pressed himself against the doors. Help! He shouted, pounding on the metal. We're in here! Woman and newborn baby! We need help! The voices became urgent, multiple people talking at once. A man's voice came through, muffled but clear enough. Can you hear us? How many people inside? 2 adults. 1 newborn. Harold called back. Baby was born inside the elevator about 20 minutes ago. Mother and baby are stable, but we need medical attention. Copy that, the voice responded. We're going to manually open the doors. The elevators jammed between the 37th and 38th floors. It's going to take some time. Sit tight. Margaret's eyes widened with fresh panic. How long? She called out, her voice shaking. How long is some time? Estimated 20 minutes, came the response. We need to shut down the shaft power and manually release the doors. Stay calm. Help is coming. 20 minutes. Margaret looked down at Hope, felt how warm she was now against her chest. But worry flooded through her. She's going to get cold, Margaret said, her voice rising. Harold, what if she gets too cold? What if… Harold was already moving. He pulled off his undershirt, the thin white cotton that was his last layer. Bare-chested now, he carefully took Hope from Margaret's arms, wrapped the baby more thoroughly in the layers of fabric his flannel shirt, his undershirt, creating a warm cocoon. Then he sat beside Margaret, positioned the baby between them, using his own body heat as a shield against the cold metal elevator. She's not going to get cold, Harold said firmly. We're keeping her warm. Feel her. She's fine. Margaret touched Hope's cheek, felt the warmth there, saw her daughter sleeping peacefully. She looked at Harold, shirtless and shivering slightly in the cool air, and felt her throat tighten. He was sacrificing his own comfort without hesitation, without even seeming to think about it. You're cold, Margaret said. I'm fine, Harold replied, waving it off. Hope's going to meet a whole team of doctors soon. Best doctors in the city, right here in this hospital. They're going to check her over. Make sure everything's perfect. Which it is. Look at her. She's beautiful, strong, healthy. He kept talking, his gravelly voice filling the time, distracting Margaret from her exhaustion and fear. He told her about Lucas's first days, about Emma's joy, about how babies were more resilient than people thought. The rescue sounds continued outside, drilling, metal scraping, voices coordinating, and Harold talked through it all. A steady presence, keeping them both calm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, there was a grinding screech of metal. The elevator doors began to pry apart, inch by tortuous inch. Light flooded in from above, bright fluorescent hospital lighting that made them both squint. The doors opened just the top 18 inches, revealing the 37th floor. Firefighters peered down into the elevator, their faces appearing upside down in the gap. Hospital staff crowded behind them, and Margaret recognized Dr. Chen, her obstetrician, pushing through to the front. Everyone started shouting at once. How many injured? Is the baby okay? Ma'am, can you hear me? We need to assess. Harold raised his voice, clear and authoritative over the chaos. Listen, baby born approximately 90 minutes ago. Mother is stable, mild bleeding, but nothing alarming. Baby is breathing normally. Color is good. Crying well. Both need immediate medical attention, but neither is in crisis. The shouting stopped. Doctor, Chen stared down at Harold, stunned. Who delivered the baby? I did, Harold said simply. Harold Jenkins, night janitor. I've delivered one before. Everything went as well as could be expected given the circumstances. Doctor? Chen's expression shifted from shock to professional assessment. All right, we're lowering a rescue harness. Baby comes up first. Two firefighters lowered a specialized harness designed for infant rescue. Harold took it, his hands steady despite his exhaustion, and carefully secured Hope in the padded straps. He checked every buckle twice, made sure she was safe, then wrapped the flannel shirt more tightly around her. She's secure, he called up. Bring her up slowly. Harold and Margaret watched as their daughter was lifted through the narrow opening, her tiny form disappearing into the waiting hands of a pediatric team above. Margaret sobbed, her arms suddenly empty. Then the harness came back down for Margaret. Two firefighters talked her through securing it, and Harold helped, making sure every strap was tight. I'll be right behind you, he promised. Margaret gripped his hand one last time. Don't leave, she said. Please, don't disappear. I won't, Harold said. I promise. Margaret was lifted up, pulled through the opening with careful hands. Then the harness came down a third time for Harold. He secured it around himself, and 2 firefighters reached down, gripping his arms, pulling him up as he climbed. When Harold emerged onto the 37th floor, the scene was controlled chaos. Medical teams, firefighters, hospital administrators, all moving with urgent purpose. He stood there, bare-chested, covered in blood and fluid, his uniform pants stained, his feet in unlaced boots, utterly exhausted. And everyone stopped and stared. Margaret was already on a gurney, 2 nurses positioning her, preparing to rush her to labor and delivery. Another nurse held Hope, wrapped in hospital blankets now, following close behind. The team moved with practiced efficiency, wheels beginning to roll. Margaret's head turned, her eyes searching frantically. "Harold!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Harold!" Harold tried to step back, to give the medical team space to work, to return to his invisible place in the background. This was their world now, doctors and nurses, proper care. He'd done his part. But Margaret's hand shot out, grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't leave," she sobbed. "Please, Harold, don't leave. Ma'am, we need to move," one of the nurses said gently, trying to pry Margaret's fingers loose. "We need to get you to—" "He comes with me," Margaret said, her grip tightening. The head nurse, a stern woman in her 50s named Patricia, whom Harold had known for years, stepped forward. "Mrs. Harris, he's not family. He can't be in the treatment area. Hospital policy." "He delivered my baby," Margaret said, her voice suddenly strong, forceful, cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "He saved our lives. He kept us alive in that elevator. He comes with me. I don't care about policy." Patricia hesitated, looked to Dr. Chen. The doctor met Margaret's eyes, saw the desperation there, the profound bond that had formed in that broken elevator. She looked at Harold, still shirtless and covered in blood, and nodded slowly. "He stays close, Doctor," Chen said. "Mr. Jenkins, walk with us." Harold moved to the gurney, and Margaret's hand found his again, held tight. They began moving down the corridor, the team surrounding them, wheels clicking rapidly against the tile floor Harold had mopped 1,000 times. Hospital staff stopped and stared as they passed. Everyone knew Harold. The quiet janitor who came in at night, who nodded politely, who cleaned without complaint. They'd seen him pushing his cart for years, decades, barely noticing him, but no one had ever seen him like this. Bare-chested, covered in blood, holding hands with Margaret Harris, the Margaret Harris whose name was on the East Wing, whose donations funded entire departments. This wealthy philanthropist and this janitor, connected by something so profound that words couldn't capture it. Nurses whispered. Doctors paused mid-conversation. A security guard actually removed his cap, and Harold walked beside Margaret, holding her hand, his calloused fingers wrapped around her manicured ones. 2 people from different worlds bound together by the miracle they'd survived. In the examination room, Dr. Chen worked with swift efficiency, checking Margaret thoroughly while a pediatric team examined Hope on a warming table nearby. Harold stood against the wall, trying to be invisible again, but Margaret kept glancing at him, making sure he was still there. After 15 minutes of careful assessment, Dr. Chen straightened, a look of wonder on her face. "You're both perfectly healthy," she said. "Margaret, you're stable. No excessive bleeding, no tears that need attention. Your vitals are good." She turned to the pediatric team. "And the baby?" "Perfect," the pediatrician said, smiling. "APGAR scores are excellent. Temperature stable, breathing normal, reflexes strong. She's absolutely perfect." "Doctor," Chen turned to Harold, shook her head in disbelief. "You did everything right. Everything. The cord. Keeping the baby warm. Monitoring the mother. You did the work of a trained professional." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what needed doing." "You're a hero," Dr. Chen said firmly. "What's your medical background?" "Paramedic? EMT? Janitor," Harold said quietly. "My wife was a nurse. She taught me things, and I delivered my grandson once, years ago. That's all." Doctor. Chen looked humbled, stunned into silence by the enormity of what this quiet man had accomplished. The door opened. A hospital administrator entered, a man in his 50s in an expensive suit, carrying a tablet. Harold recognized him vaguely. Mr. Whitmore, someone important, though Harold had never spoken to him. I need to understand what happened, Whitmore said, his tone official, already typing notes. For the incident report. Who was involved? Harold Jenkins saved my life, and my daughter's life, Margaret said, her voice clear and strong now, no longer the terrified woman from the elevator. The elevator stopped. I went into labor. Harold delivered my baby with his bare hands. He kept us both alive. She told the story, detail by detail, her voice unwavering. Whitmore typed, nodded, made appropriate sounds. Then he seemed to register who was speaking. His eyes widened slightly. Mrs. Harris. Margaret Harris. I didn't realize. Of course, we'll make sure everything is documented properly. Your comfort is our priority, and we'll… Margaret watched his demeanor shift, watched him become deferential and fawning, and felt disgust rise in her throat. Do you know his name? She interrupted, pointing at Harold. Whitmore blinked. I'm sorry? Harold Jenkins. Do you know his name? Margaret asked, her voice sharp. Silence. Whitmore glanced at Harold, at the name stitched on his uniform pants. He's worked here for 27 years, Margaret said coldly. 27 years. And you don't know his name. Harold cleared his throat, took a small step toward the door. I should get back to work, he said quietly. Need to finish my shift. My cart's still in the elevator shaft, and Margaret's hand shot out, caught his wrist. No. Not yet. Please. Harold hesitated, uncomfortable with all the eyes on him, with the attention, with standing shirtless in an examination room surrounded by doctors and administrators. This wasn't his world. He didn't belong here. I need your phone number, Margaret said. I want to stay in touch. I need to stay in touch. Harold fumbled in his pocket, found a pen on the counter, scribbled his number on a scrap of paper torn from Whitmore's notepad. His handwriting was shaky, barely legible. It's my cell, he said. It's old, but it works. Margaret took the paper, clutched it like something precious. I'll call you. Soon. I promise. A nurse, sensing Harold's discomfort, gently intervened. Mrs. Harris needs to rest now, and the baby needs to nurse. Mr. Jenkins, why don't we get you cleaned up? Find you a shirt. Harold nodded gratefully, squeezed Margaret's hand one last time, and let himself be ushered out of the room. The door closed behind him. In the hallway, the sounds of the hospital rushed back, beeping monitors, distant conversations, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. Harold stood alone, and suddenly the adrenaline that had sustained him for the past 2 hours drained away completely. His hands started shaking. His legs felt weak. He leaned against the wall, processing what had just happened. He'd delivered a baby. In an elevator. Both mother and child were alive and healthy. It felt surreal. Impossible. Jenkins! A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Harold looked up to see his supervisor, Mr. Patterson, striding down the hallway, his face set in disapproval. I heard about the incident, Patterson said. You abandoned your cleaning cart. Left it in the elevator shaft. Do you have any idea the disruption that's caused? Maintenance had to retrieve it, and now we're behind schedule on the 40th floor. Harold straightened, though exhaustion made his spine ache. I'm sorry, sir. I'll retrieve it and get back to work immediately. See that you do, Patterson said. And next time, call for help instead of taking matters into your own hands. We have protocols for emergencies. He walked away without another word, without acknowledgement of what Harold had done, without even asking if he was all right. Harold stood there in the empty hallway, shirtless, covered in dried blood, his hands still trembling. And suddenly he felt very old, very tired, and very invisible again. Just the night janitor, nothing more. 2 days later, Harold returned to his regular shift. The story had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Everyone had heard about the janitor who delivered a baby in the broken elevator. But as Harold pushed his cart through the familiar hallways, most people still didn't acknowledge him. A few nurses nodded, maybe held his gaze a second longer than usual. One doctor said, "Good job, Harold," as he passed. But mostly, Harold was invisible again. Just the night janitor, cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, back to normal. His hands were healing slowly. Blisters had formed where the shoelaces had cut into his palms when he tied off the umbilical cord. Purple bruises marked his forearms where the firefighters had gripped him during the rescue. His shoulders ached from the tension he'd carried that night. But Harold didn't mind. The pain was a small price. Margaret and Hope were alive and healthy. That was all that mattered. He thought about them often as he worked, wondered how Hope was doing, whether she was nursing well, sleeping through the night, wondered if Margaret's husband had finally come home. He pulled out the small scrap of paper where Margaret had written her number she'd insisted on an exchange and looked at it sometimes during his breaks. But he never called. Women like Margaret Harris didn't stay in touch with people like him. Different worlds. She'd been grateful in the moment, emotional, but reality would set in. She had her life, her mansion, her charity galas. He had his bus rides and his mop bucket. That was just how things were. On his break Thursday night, Harold sat in the basement break room with his thermos of coffee and called Emma. "Dad," she answered on the second ring. "I've been waiting for you to call. Tell me everything." Harold told her the whole story, every detail he could remember. When he finished, Emma was crying. "Dad, you're amazing. You're a hero. I'm so proud of you." "Just did what needed doing," Harold said. The same thing he'd told everyone. "I wish I could see you more." Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "I miss you so much." "I know, sweetheart. I miss you too. But you've got your life there. Your job. The kids. I understand. You shouldn't have to ride the bus 2 hours every day. You shouldn't have to work so hard at your age." "I'm fine," Harold assured her, though his back ached and his feet hurt. "Really, I'm fine." They talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. Harold finished his coffee, stood, felt every one of his 63 years in his joints. He returned his cart to the 40th floor and resumed cleaning. His life had returned to normal, or so he thought. 2 weeks after the elevator incident, Harold was summoned to the hospital administrator's office. The message came through his supervisor. Terse and formal. "Report to administration. 9th floor, 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon." Harold's stomach dropped. He was in trouble. Had to be. Maybe Patterson had filed a complaint about the abandoned cart. Maybe someone had reported him for being in the treatment area without authorization. Maybe they'd decided his actions were reckless, a liability. He spent the morning sick with worry, barely eating his lunch, his hands shaking as he rode the elevator up to the 9th floor at 1:55. He'd changed into his cleanest uniform, tried to make himself presentable, though he still looked like what he was, an aging janitor, out of place in the carpeted administrative corridors. The receptionist directed him to Whitmore's office. Harold knocked softly, heard a muffled, "Come in," and pushed open the heavy wooden door. His breath caught. The office was full of people. Whitmore sat behind his massive desk. Several board members in expensive suits occupied chairs along the wall. And there, standing near the window holding a small bundle, was Margaret Harris. She smiled at him, warm and genuine, and Harold felt the terror ease slightly. "Mr. Jenkins," Whitmore said, his tone oddly formal. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Harold sat in the single chair facing the desk, felt all the eyes on him, wanted to disappear. "We've asked you here today," Whitmore continued, clearly reading from prepared remarks, "to formally thank you for your heroic actions 2 weeks ago. Your quick thinking and competence saved 2 lives. The hospital is grateful for your service." The words sounded rehearsed, empty. Harold nodded, unsure what to say. Then Margaret stepped forward, and suddenly the room felt different. "Harold," she said, her voice cutting through the formality. "I've spent the last 2 weeks learning everything about you. Your 27 years of service here. Your salary." She named the number, and Harold flushed with embarrassment. "How you send $300 every month to your daughter Emma in Portland. How you live alone in a studio apartment and ride the bus 2 hours each way to work. How you've never missed a shift in 27 years. Harold felt exposed, vulnerable, uncomfortable being scrutinized this way. Mrs. Harris, you didn't need to. I owe you everything, Margaret interrupted gently. You gave me my daughter, you kept us both alive, and I want to give something back. She shifted Hope in her arms, and the baby made a small sound. Not because I pity you, not because I think you need saving, but because you deserve to be seen, valued, honored for who you are and what you've given. Harold's throat tightened. I don't need anything. I'm fine. I know you are, Margaret said, but I'm asking you to let me do this anyway. Margaret turned to address the room, though her words were meant for Harold. I'm establishing a scholarship fund in Harold Jenkins's name for hospital employees' children who want to pursue medical careers. It will be funded in perpetuity and will cover full tuition, books, and living expenses. She looked directly at Harold. Emma will be the first recipient. I've already spoken with her. Full tuition to nursing school at Portland State. She starts in the fall. Harold's eyes filled with tears. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. What? No, I can't. Emma can't. She already said yes, Margaret said gently. She cried for 20 minutes on the phone. She's so proud of you, Harold. Harold couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Emma, his Emma, nursing school. Following in Sarah's footsteps, the dream she'd given up when her husband left, when she had to work full-time to support her kids. But I'm not finished, Margaret continued. She nodded to Whitmore, who opened a folder on his desk. Harold, you've worked here for 27 years. You've earned a full pension. I've arranged with the hospital board for you to retire, effective immediately, with full benefits and health care for life. Retire? Harold whispered. I can't afford to, and I've purchased a house for you, Margaret said. A small house, 2 bedrooms, fully paid. It's 10 minutes from here, in a quiet neighborhood. Emma is moving back. I've offered her a position managing the scholarship fund, working from home so she can be with her children. She'll be close to you, Harold. You'll see your grandchildren every day. Harold stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. A house. Emma moving back. Retirement. It was too much, impossibly too much. He said, his voice breaking. I can't accept this. It's too much. I don't deserve. Margaret walked over, knelt beside his chair, holding Hope so he could see her. The baby's eyes were open, dark, and aware. You gave her life, Margaret said, tears streaming down her own face. You gave me hope when I had none. You saw me when I was invisible. You stayed calm when I was terrified. You sacrificed everything, your clothes, your comfort, your dignity, without asking for anything in return. She reached out, took his calloused hand in hers. This isn't charity, Harold. This is gratitude. This is me saying that you matter, that your life has value, that you deserve to be seen and honored. Please, will you accept? Harold looked at Hope, at Margaret, at the faces around the room. He thought of Emma, of grandchildren he barely saw, of bus rides and aching feet, and endless nights pushing a cart through empty hallways. He thought of Sarah, and how she would tell him to say yes, to accept grace when it was offered. He nodded, unable to speak, tears flowing freely down his weathered face. Yes, he whispered. Yes. 6 months later, Harold's small house glowed with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows he kept spotlessly clean out of habit. The 2-bedroom cottage had become a home, filled with the warmth he'd forgotten was possible. His woodworking tools, packed away for 27 years, now occupied the garage he'd converted into a workshop. The smell of sawdust and varnish filled the air as he carved and sanded, his calloused hands remembering skills he thought he'd lost. He built toys for Hope, for Lucas, for Emma's children, who visited every single day. A rocking horse, a puzzle box, a small wooden train. Emma lived just 3 blocks away now, managing the scholarship fund from her dining room table, her children playing in Harold's backyard after school. Harold saw his grandchildren daily, felt their arms around his neck, heard their laughter echo through rooms that had been silent for so long. Margaret visited every week, sometimes twice, pulling up in her Mercedes with Hope strapped in the back seat. The baby was 6 months old now, thriving, all chubby cheeks and gummy smiles. A genuine friendship had formed between Harold and Margaret, built not on debt or obligation, but on mutual respect and deep affection. Margaret asked Harold's advice about everything, about parenting, about what mattered in life, about how to find meaning beyond money. Harold taught Hope's nanny the breathing techniques Sarah had taught him, showed her how to swaddle properly, shared the wisdom of a man who'd lived and loved and lost and somehow found grace in all of it. They shared coffee at Harold's small kitchen table, told stories, laughed about that night in the elevator that felt both like yesterday and like a lifetime ago. Harold's life had been transformed, not by wealth, though he no longer rode the bus or worried about bills, but by something far more valuable, by connection, by being seen, by one act of compassion that had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined. This afternoon, Harold sat in his rocking chair, the one he'd built himself, holding Hope in his arms. She smiled up at him, grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, made the cooing sounds that melted his heart. Margaret watched from the doorway, her own heart full, thinking about that night, about how terror had become miracle, about how a broken elevator had delivered more than just a baby. In a broken elevator between floors, 2 lives had begun. Hope's life, red-faced and wailing, wrapped in a janitor's flannel shirt, and Harold's new life, born from crisis, delivered by kindness, sustained by the simple truth that everyone, every single person, deserves to be seen, valued, and loved, not for what they own or what their name is on a building, but for who they are, for the grace they carry, for the quiet heroism of showing up, staying present, and doing what needs to be done. Harold looked down at Hope, then up at Margaret, and smiled. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be.